Welcome to the webinar on Slingshot to Success, how to launch OKRs first time right. I'm Nikhil Mani, your host, and on behalf of Profit.co and Okr International, we would like to welcome you all to this webinar. Thank you folks for joining us as we spend the next 90 minutes discussing client stories, expert opinions, and some tried and tested OKR guidelines to help you get more successful with your OKR implementation. With me today are co-hosts Senthil Rajagopalan from Profit.co and Kenneth Lewis from Okr International, my dear friend. We also are extremely delighted to welcome Mr. Ganesh Kesri, our special guest from Gramener. Gramener is a data science company based in Bangalore, India. So welcome, Ganesh. I look forward to having a great conversation with you. There's one more thing before we jump right in, and this is for the audience. Feel free to type in your questions and we will answer them. I don't promise being able to answer all your questions, but we will definitely pick up some of the more interesting ones and see if we can do justice with the limited time that we have today. So one more time, a big warm welcome to everybody. Really excited about today. And with this, I would like to jump in and call on Senthil, if you could do a quick introduction for us. Tell us a little about Profit.co, why do we exist as a company, and a little about yourself, please.
Sure. Thank you, Nikhil, and thanks a lot to the audience who have just joined. Profit.co is a Silicon Valley SaaS startup. We help companies execute their strategy and improve the performances of teams through the OKR framework. We are rated top 5 in the business by customer reviews in G2, Capterra. We have already been mentioned by Gartner in a couple of reports. And we are used by the leading enterprises in the world, including the Tata Group in India, Aqua Power in the Middle East, Tesco Mobile in Europe, and innovative startups like BrowserStack and Docker. Thank you, Nikhil.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Senthil. And with this, I'd like to invite Kenneth to do a quick introduction about OKR International, who we are and why we exist.
Thank you, Nikhil, my friend. And very good evening and good afternoon or good morning to everyone who have just joined in to this amazing webinar on getting OKRs right, the slingshot to success. So yeah, OKR International has been in the field of OKRs for the past now 6 years. And over the last 6 years, our prerogative is to help organizations in moving from just strategy conversations to executable strategies using OKRs. And a big part of what we do is helping organizations in training, coaching, and consulting in the entire culture transformation that lies along with OKRs. So that includes leadership development, a lot of one-on-one group work, one-on-one work that we do with leaders, group work, and a whole lot of other things that we do. So we're a full stack service, pure play service provider in the field of OKRs. And we have partners globally that we work with in almost 8 different countries, helping with all those people, helping different clients, different companies, different firms at different stages of their growth in order for them to implement OKRs successfully. Why we exist? We exist in order to help those organizations and many more in becoming more agile, more successful, more collaborative. So that's why we exist as an organization.
Thank you for that, Kenneth. Really appreciate it. And we also have a very special guest today, Ganesh Kesri, who's a co-founder and chief decision scientist at Gramener. So Ganesh, a quick introduction from your end would be splendid.
Thank you, Nikhil. Hello, everyone. At Gramener, our mission is to transform decision-making with insightful data stories, bringing impossibilities to life. So we transform decision-making using our low-code data platform. We build custom solutions, custom domain solutions on our low-code platform for 100+ clients, the likes of Novartis, Deloitte, Microsoft, Ernst & Young. We have, with a team of 250+ people globally, we've been serving and delivering impact from data and analytics. For example, we helped a Fortune 50 technology company increase their annual revenue by over $50 million by improving customer satisfaction, identifying the right insights, and presenting as a rich narrative. So that is our mission, and excited to be here, Nikhil.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Ganesh. And that kind of actually segues really well into this next big slide that you see here. In fact, I remember when we went on to decide, hey, let's do a webinar together. And we were talking about what do we really want to talk about, right? And we said, let's talk about that big elephant in the room. Many organizations look at trying and testing OKRs out, and not everyone is successful. In fact, some of our quick statistics tell us that 8 out of 10 organizations don't get it right the first time. And I think that's one of those things that we wanted to choose to address. And that's going to be our topic for the next 90 minutes or so. And this is a big question going out to Senthil first. Senthil, any ideas or insights that you would like to share about why you think it's important for organizations to get OKRs right in the first launch?
Sure, absolutely. I'm sure most of the audience here, all of us are familiar that OKRs were born in the Silicon Valley, with Intel and Google being the top promoters of the framework. But since then, in the last few years, we are actually seeing OKRs spreading quite rapidly across every industry vertical, startups, as well as large enterprises. And we even see in some very innovative government enterprises, OKRs actually spreading. So everyone wants to emulate the success of Silicon Valley and get their execution right? So this is a strategic imperative for the CXOs and for the company to get this right. In addition to the investment, they would be making, right? With consultants and with software, the biggest investment that they are making is staking the future of their own company, right? And the amount of time that their executives will be spending on execution. And there are a bunch of questions which people will have, right? Should I start small and then scale up? Or should I straight away launch across the enterprise, right? What sort of challenges would I encounter? Right? What are the top 5 red flags should I be aware of? What are the visible signs of success? How do we structure, the entire OKR calendar, right? Should it be quarterly or annual? How often do we have to check in? So people have a lot of questions, and sessions like this would really help you to learn from the experiences of folks who have done this before, right? Rather than you have to make all the mistakes and learn from your own mistakes. So I believe that's the reason why, it's a great idea to learn about how to launch OKRs first time right. This has been done by multiple organizations in multiple verticals, and the wisdom has been distilled and available, and we hope to share some of them from our experience today.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for that, Senthil. And it's almost kind of counterintuitive in more ways than one, isn't it? Because the very spirit of OKRs is about experimentation. The very spirit of OKRs is about fail fast. And how do we as an organization or even a team learn from our mistakes? And then at the same time, in the same breath, we're also saying, how do you launch OKRs first time right? So Kenneth, any thoughts on this paradox of sorts that we're dealing with?
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing about OKRs is that it's a promise. It's a promise of helping organizations scale. It's a promise that helps organizations transform its way of working into a more agile environment. It's a promise of engaging, the energies of everybody involved in an organization towards some common goals. There's this promises. There are so many promises that companies like Senthil spoke about, Intel and Google have led with those use cases of OKR implementations, and they have done it successfully over the years. The challenge, however, in all of this is not every organization is like Intel. Not every leader is like Andy Grove or Larry Brin or Sergey, Larry or Sergey. They're not the same. Every organization has its own context. Every organization has its own stage of growth. But that promise is so very attractive. And hence, a lot of mistakes happen in the beginning, first few quarters or first few years of implementing OKRs. And those mistakes can prove heavy because people then can possibly start getting disenchanted by saying, hey, there was a promise, but it doesn't seem to be working for us like it worked for Google or like it's working for LinkedIn. It's not working. Or it could also lead to people using OKRs for things that may not be optimal enough, and they may not recognize that they're using an OKR system that's not optimal, it's suboptimal. So that's why getting OKRs right, at least in the first couple of quarters, is such an important step, at least the basics of it right, before you can iterate. As Nikhil said, you can iterate, experiment, and start making those fixes. It's more than a process. It's more than a methodology. It starts becoming a way of doing work, a philosophy that gets embedded in your culture. And for that, you may not be able to design it right up forward, but at least getting the ABCs of it correct, I think that's one of the things that's required in getting the first time right OKR implementation.
Yes, and it's kind of also exciting to know that as a framework, I find OKRs one of these few frameworks around that actually integrate rather than give the users a choice to choose from. There'll be so many articles around OKR versus balanced scorecard, OKRs versus KPIs. And I think every time we come across something like this, it's just amazing to see that the question to be asked here is not OKR versus balanced scorecard or OKR versus KPIs. I think the question to be asked is OKRs and balanced scorecard, OKRs and KPIs, and it's more and rather than versus over here, simply because I think it's one framework that actually integrates into just about every single process the organization is trying to run. And there's so much to really discuss and talk about. So with that, I'm going to segue and move into asking and welcoming Ganesh. Ganesh, please do tell us what appealed to you when, as part of Gramener, what appealed to you about OKRs, and what made you reach out to Okr International to embark on the OKR journey?
Sure. Over 10 plus years of a journey at Gramener, we tried different frameworks for goal setting. Early on, we were using priority matrices. Urgency was important, and ranking and prioritizing the goals. And for a while, we were using SMART goals. And sometime along the way, my co-founder and CEO Anand stumbled upon OKRs in a blog post. I think it talked about Andy Grove and the success stories from the Silicon Valley, like you mentioned. So that was inspiring, but we were toying around with the idea. We really didn't get into that for a couple of years, actually. And then when we saw it again and again, and organizations adopting it, then we thought, okay, why not give it a shot? And that's when we started. In fact, we started this during the pandemic year. 2020 is when we first time got into OKRs and tried it out. So actually, we got hooked onto it. The first year we did make some mistakes, and then we've been improving ever since. But the idea was appealing, and the first year we definitely got benefits, which is why we have stuck onto it.
And again, I think there are ways of starting OKRs, and then there are ways of starting OKRs, right? And in very many organizations, I have seen that OKRs are really successful because some of the leaders actually take extra effort to see how OKRs are actually a manifestation of the overall vision, mission, values, and purpose of the organization. We've seen some cases where OKRs do run in the absence of a vision, mission, or purpose statement of the organization. We've also seen some companies run OKRs without being clear about the strategy. In your opinion, Ganesh, and your experience, what role does having a very clear purpose statement and a very clear go-to-market strategy, what role does that play in the success of your OKR implementation?
Yeah, I think it's very important, and by design, objectives should be directly linked back to the organization's strategy, purpose, and vision. When we were using the other goal-setting frameworks, at least it wasn't as clear. The linkage wasn't as clear. Whereas with OKRs, choosing fewer number of objectives and big, broad objectives, which are inspiring enough for the organization and for the entire team. So there, linking it back to purpose, mission, and vision is key. And I think it's important to start with that. Interestingly, over the last couple of years since we started, we've been refining our thought process. And this year we updated our purpose and vision statement, just refining it further. And I would say, thanks to our journey with OKRs, it brought us a lot more clarity to go back and update this after so many years.
Yeah, and clarity is one of those superpowers, right, that OKRs actually provide to teams and organizations. It just gives you that clarity of what's happening around today, where do I want to be tomorrow, and how do I share this clarity with the rest of the people? And that's where the whole transparency piece really comes in. Thank you for that answer, Ganesh. And the next one is for you, Kenneth. And my question for you is, when Okr International started their journey in helping Gramener with their OKR journey, what are some of the things that Okr International actually did to get OKRs right the first time?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to, just go back in time a bit there. I remember when, the founding team, Anand, Naveen, you, Ganesh, you guys reached out to us for OKRs, and you laid out to us what you've already done in the past and a year of doing OKRs, and realizing that, you're finding it difficult to do OKRs in the way it's supposed to be done. I think one of the things that we ended up doing very well for you guys, because the situation was so clearly laid out to us. It was easy for us. The first thing that we needed to do was create a uniform understanding of OKRs. And that was the first thing, because there were a lot of assumptions. Many people had different ideas about OKRs. And even today, we have 90 plus participants today. I'm sure even if I asked them to write the definition of OKRs, each one of them would have a different definition. And that goes back to even everyone's current problem, that, you look at OKRs through different sources of information. Now, maybe the premise is the same, but then when it comes to slight differences, it can cause a lot of confusion on how OKRs are supposed to be done. Are OKRs supposed to be top down? Are OKRs supposed to be, bottom up? Are OKRs supposed to be only for leaders? Who is OKRs for? So there were a lot of questions that we had at that time. I remember one of the biggest questions that you guys had is, how much of OKRs do we need to have? And I remember the first thing that we did right for you guys is we just gave you those 4 boxes, 4 objectives. And we said, for 4 objectives, maximum 5 key results. And I think that kind of helped you to a great extent in bringing all that you're doing in your strategy and putting it in those boxes as a social process. I believe, the uniform training that we spend those 8 hours going through those training programs for all the leaders and everybody involved, and then giving you the template that helped you to a great extent in getting OKRs right. And we saw the change in energy from where we started in the initial with the team on communicating about OKRs. And by the time we had done setting the OKRs, we saw a different sense of energy. I remember we did a rating at the end of that exercise as well, and asking how confident do you feel in your OKRs? And everybody were like 8, 9, 8, 9. And that gave us a good feeling on a scale of 10.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
Just to add to that, when we reached out to you, this was 2021, last year. And it was the first time we were doing our annual goal setting remote. We've always been doing it offsite, bringing all the people together. So we had our doubts as to how effective it would be. And we were very worried because OKRs, obviously, it was working, but there were challenges we were facing. And that's when we decided to take your help. And this session was, I think, a couple of hours spread over 3 days. It was very packed, high energy session. And like you mentioned, so the outcomes were very clear, and pushing people to come up with fewer goals, fewer sharper goals. It is very powerful. It is tough to do, packing 10 things into 2 or 3 things, but once you condense it, it can be very, very potent.
And Ganesh, what's the one thing on top of mind for you? If I'd ask you to share with our lovely audience here today, what's that one thing on top of mind that is, a glaring top tip that you would like to share with all our audience today about implementing OKRs first time?
Yeah. If I were to share just one thing, that would be getting clarity on what OKRs really are. I think Ken touched on it. And we did it. We tried out some things last year, and this actually worked very beautifully. So a few weeks before we did the OKR planning session, we wanted the teams to understand OKRs in the full spirit. So what we did was we bought this book by John Doerr. So we bought this book and shipped a hard copy to every single person, the leadership team globally. And we also launched a book club of sorts, each person picking up a chapter, reading and summarizing it for the colleagues. So they also spoke. We had a short 2-minute summary and a written down summary. We compiled it all together like a book summary and an audio book, and had people go through it. So that was a fun exercise, and surprisingly, people came in with very good clarity when we were doing the goal setting session. What objectives are, what KRs are. They were able to relate back to the stories from the Silicon Valley. A lot of examples in this book. So I think getting clarity on OKRs even before you get started with this exercise, I think that would be the top tip.
Yeah, and that's amazing, because I have a couple of observations here. One is about the book itself. I think this is a great book, a huge inspiration for most people interested in OKRs. And I think one of the other things that this book does is it raises more questions than gives you answers about OKRs. And I do remember all those questions coming to us about how do we do this and how do we do that. That's one side of the story, and the other side of the story also is the fact that when we set about doing, I distinctly remember we said less is more, and we want to focus on a few priorities, and we want to keep OKRs as collective as possible. And there's this really interesting question come from our audience over here. Is it easier to get OKRs implemented first time right when the scale or the size of the team or the company is really not that large? And I think my answer to that is going to be an unequivocal yes. I think the smaller the team, obviously, it gets much more easier to plan OKRs, to align them, to get them implemented, and also review it on a regular basis. I think the real challenge in implementing OKRs the first time round is when you're doing it in a really large enterprise, right? And that's where complexities come in, because there are multiple products, multiple geographies, multiple functions, multiple layers, and so on and so forth. Obviously, it's an extremely intricate exercise. And I think that kind of worked with Gramnell as well, Ganesh. If you remember, we started off with a really small team. I think we were 35, 40 people. Am I correct?
Yeah, we brought in the leadership team about 35 people.
Absolutely. So that kind of really helps in that sense. Kenneth, I'm going to ask you the next question here. I'm really interested for you to share this with the audience today. What was the process that we adopted? And if you could tell people what these steps really look like, if you could help them visualize it for people, or what really went on from the word go when we took up that project with Gramnell.
Yeah, I think the first thing I already said is that we had some intense conversations with the leadership team. So Naveen, Anand, having those couple of hours of conversations after conversations. And the idea of those conversations was, of course, one is to instill and understand what can OKRs do. Instill and understand that this is an iterative experimental process. Understand that this is a social process. And very importantly, make everyone understand that OKRs are not for all the goals. It's for a few called out goals. Now, of course, the leadership at Gramnell made it very easy for us because they had a very clear-cut strategy in place. I think if I had to look at it for any other organization, that would be an initial challenge for any company. Having a very, very sound, aligned strategy among its leaders is one of the crucial first steps in getting OKRs right. Because if you're expecting that OKRs will lead you to a strategy, then I think that's a pipe dream. Because you need to be able to think about what are your short-term goals, what are your long-term goals, where do you see your organization headed towards? And as Nikhil said, even looking at beyond that, sometimes as a purpose of your organization is critical. So yeah, that was the first step. Those many conversations that we had combining the US hours and Indian hours together and having those late evening conversations just to get understanding of these few things. The next thing was, of course, the training program and making sure everybody's calibrated with the same understanding of what OKRs can do and what they need to do with respect to this learning. The third step from there on was creating the annual OKR goals for the organization. And that's when, if you remember, I told you about those 4 objectives and each objective having boxes and in it. We gave that template and we got the team to do some pre-work. They came in and we facilitated almost like a couple of hours of sessions with the leadership team to create the first draft of the annual and the quarter OKRs, the immediate quarter OKRs. So that was done. And in that process, everybody was involved. But we didn't stop there. The next step from them is to get I remember we had SBUs, we had sales and marketing, we had the engineering team, we had the data science team, we had the platform teams. All these teams were then given the job of saying the bottom-up contribution. What is it that you want to write as your OKRs to contribute to this high-level OKRs at the organization level? So each one of them was given the same template, but empty this time. And they had to think about their own contribution towards it. They went, they created it. We facilitated almost an hour and a half to 2 hours of session per department to make sure that they got the understanding right. They got KRs that are not just activity KRs, but they got KRs that are outcome KRs in place, objectives that are connected to the high level objectives. So we did all of that stitching in together. And by the time we had done, the last step in all of it was what we called as the speed dating round, which was all about getting the teams to look at the interdependencies. The challenge that we see in many OKR implementations is that they're cascade. So the leaders say, let's do the OKRs, here are the OKRs, and they also then inform or maybe even direct, or in worst cases, even order the OKRs for everybody else. And then it's left to that. The problem there is organizations in reality don't function that way. They function with a lot of interdependencies. There needs to be that bottom up, which is the social democratic process of people choosing and being empowered to choose their goals and linking in the goals with each other as well. And the speed dating round was about that. Yeah. Nikhil, can't hear you.
Tell me a little more about how this entire speed dating piece works virtually, especially when you're not seeing somebody face to face. How does it really work? And what is it really giving people at the end of the day?
Yeah, that's why we like platforms like Zoom, because they help us do the speed dating really well. So let's look at what is speed dating. Speed dating is an exercise in which every team is able to connect with every other team and share their expectations of each other in order to get the OKRs successful for that quarter. That's what it is. So as I said, we had SBUs, we had sales and marketing, we had engineering, we had design, we had data, we had so many teams. They got to meet each other in multiple rounds. So it was a facilitated 2-hour session where everybody got an opportunity to talk to every other team and gather the requirements of the team that they're entering into and also give requirements of them to that team. At the end of it, they sat down with every team. For example, the sales and marketing team sat down with a list of requirements from other teams saying that in order for them to achieve their OKRs, what do they need from the sales and marketing team? So sales and marketing team had a list of things that they could choose from, pick and choose, and then shake hands and agree with their stakeholders that this is what we promise to help you with. I think that is unleashing that potential within the organization that's usually missed in a traditional cascade, because people don't get to talk to each other that much. Now, once you set that exercise, it doesn't mean you need to do it every quarter after that. Once you set the ball rolling, then it's about making sure that the teams then do those conversations with each other. You don't need a speed dating round again, but just making those conversations happen before they are finalizing their OKRs is an important step in finalizing OKRs. So that's speed dating.
and I guess a lot has to do with bringing out the other superpower of OKRs, and that's calling out multi-directional interdependencies, right? And that also means OKRs are not just about getting strategic direction, which is top down, but they're also about inviting people through a social process to start looking at how they can contribute, bring that additional discretionary effort, and say, hey, you know what, this is what I think, or we think as a team, we can contribute to the overall organizational OKRs. So that's the bottom-up piece. And what I'm hearing from you, Kenny, is the speed dating piece actually helps you with the cross-alignment on looking at how one team may be interdependent with another team and doing that across the board for everybody. And that's pretty interesting because I think just the bottom-up alignment may not be sufficient, simply because teams need to see how they would be collaborating together and what would be those lines of collaboration. And I think getting that software piece to come in over here and looking at all these linkages just makes it absolutely beautiful to even look at. And Senthil over here, I know it's a question of the whack for you, but it's amazing to see how softwares can do that. Any thoughts and ideas there, Senthil, for you that you could share with the audience here on what Profit can do to bring these interdependencies alive?
Sure, absolutely. When a lot of folks start with OKRs, with a spreadsheet, actually, right? So you have managers and OKR champions who are driving the OKR initiatives. You have individual contributors who need to check in their key results. Mm-hmm. And you have executives who are very interested to know, right, how the whole program is proceeding, how the execution is happening. And they would like to know at the very earliest, right, if there is a red flag somewhere, right? So they are really interested in knowing the problems early, knowing how things are proceeding, right? So you have three types of stakeholders. And having a software will really help you to scale up pretty easily, right? So if you're an individual contributor, instead of working with spreadsheets and templates, right, where you may not have a very intuitive way of entering your OKRs, or not having ready-made KPIs, right, for you to choose from, and probably people may even end up using multiple versions, right? How do you do alignment if you are doing things with a spreadsheet? It's funny to see people doing color coding for alignment and all of those, right? So as an individual contributor, you really feel that this is a real pain, right, if you keep using with the spreadsheets. And we can't underestimate the amount of employee engagement that is really required to make an OKR program a success. And what I would advise people is, don't make it too difficult, right, by not having a great software, right? And of course, for managers, when they have to see, right, very quickly who has checked in, who has not checked in, or how their team members are actually working, or if they need to conduct meetings with OKRs in the background, for all of that, having a great tool would really help. And if you are an executive, having a software to help you to identify problem areas, able to drill down, quickly command and engage folks who are having great progress in their key results, right? So having a good OKR platform with employee engagement built in, as well as task management built in, is really going to help your OKR adoption, improve.
Yes, and I also always like to ask this question, not so much as why should I get a software? I think the bigger question to ask is, what do I stand to lose if I don't get a good software, right? And it's not just tangible, a whole lot of intangibles involved there. So thank you for that answer, Senthil. Ganesh, I would like to take our discussion a little further, and I think I have a couple questions for you at this stage. Looking at your experience in retro, right? That's one of the jargons that we use quite often in the world of OKRs. Looking back in the last year or two that you've been as an organization using OKRs, for our audience here today, what would be your top 5 good things to do while implementing OKRs for the first time? What would those top 5 things really look like?
Sure. Firstly, start with the organizational strategy and link the OKRs back to the strategy. OKR is a tool, a framework we need to start with what the organization wants to achieve in a particular year or a number of years, right? So that's first suggestion, link it to the strategy. Number two, start with a small manageable list. 3 to 4 objectives and KRs within those are pretty good for a start. It is tempting to add a lot more when you don't want to prioritize and pick a few, but that can be costly. Go down to a small manageable list.
Right.
Third one, there are two kinds of goals organizations would have, and that has been our experience. Some you want to change the business, some will help you to run the business. So OKRs we've seen are more suitable for change the business kind of goals, where you are taking a bold step and a directional change. Whereas KPIs, which is bread and butter stuff you've institutionalized already, they can be tracked separately. You don't have to bring all of those into the same OKRs. So distinguishing run the business versus change the business goals. That's number 3. And fourth, make sure that the OKRs are ambitious. Again, when you set goals, the teams would have their reservations that how would I look if I'm not able to meet 100% end of the year. So, but by design, OKRs should be ambitious. It's we've seen that it's okay to meet about 50, 60, 70%. That in itself shifts the organization by a huge magnitude because you take stretch goals. So by all means, take stretch goals as part of your as part of the objectives and the key results, the metrics that you set. And finally, cross-link the OKRs, the speed dating exercise, which Ken mentioned. I think that was one of the highlights for me from our workshop. That helped bring in a close interlinkage between the different teams. If we have the platform team developing a data science platform, they need to bring in the domain element working closely with the SBUs. They need to bring in the competence from the centers of excellence. They need to work closely with the marketing and sales team. How do you link all of these together? OKRs can be very good at doing that. Make sure that you establish that cross-linkage, multi-directional cross-linkage. So those are the 5 suggestions. Just to recap, link it to the strategy, start with it. Keep it as a small manageable list. Distinguish, change the business versus run the business, OKRs and KPIs. And be ambitious in the goal setting. And finally, cross-link the OKRs.
The cross-link piece is really one of my favorites too, isn't it? And I just feel that it's just one of those things that really bring the much needed life into true collaboration, as we would like to call it, right? Otherwise, we still continue working in silos, and that's what we don't want. And OKR has this superpower, and I think one should definitely use it. Thank you. I think these are fantastic tips. I want to flip the coin now, Ganesh, and ask you, what's the one thing that you think you've learned from, or you would advise the audience to not do, very particularly not do while implementing OKRs for the first time?
Yeah, there's one taboo, which is don't link OKRs to the performance management system. It could be tempting when you've spent time laying out goals, you have nice metrics, stretch goals. It could be tempting to link it back to the performance incentives. In fact, we thought about it. Thankfully, we didn't go that direction. Because that kills the initiative of taking stretch goals. We want people to think, to take those moonshots. But when they take the moonshots, they should have that confidence that even if they don't meet it 100%, they won't be judged for it, or they won't be penalized for it. So that way, in fact, interestingly, in our quarterly all hands, we present the OKRs to the entire team. And for anyone coming in new into the organization, they might be wondering, why is the CEO presenting the OKRs and they're showing 50, 60% and they're proudly displaying the numbers when they're meeting only about 50% of the goals at organization level. So it's okay to meet it part and also make all efforts to see how we can increase that performance. But again, by all means, don't link it to the performance management system. That can be disastrous.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of chatter around not linking OKRs to rewards and incentives. And I'm always reminded of Dan Pink's book, Drive, where he talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And the fact that, over the last 50 odd years, I think we've run this so many times. There are experiments after experiments, and it's proven that what science knows and what business does are there's a huge disconnect. And the fun part is every time we incentivize people, the focus gets narrower. We can't do innovative stuff. Performance goes down, and that's exactly what OKRs are not meant to do for us. So thank you for sharing that, Ganesh. There are a couple of really interesting questions here from people, and we have another 5 minutes to go, Ganesh. So I'm going to throw a couple of questions at you if you're willing to take them.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I think there's a good question here. I'd like to hear from the panelists what they think about implementing OKRs on a personal level. Is it crucial to measure employee performance? So any thoughts on that, Ganesh, from your end?
So we have, when we do this organizational exercise, we start with the organizational level, and we have the SBUs and the teams setting the goals. And then we leave it to the teams to have the employees set the OKRs themselves. And some people like doing it, some people don't. So we keep it optional. That's how we are operating today. And there are several people who are inspired by the idea of OKRs, and they create personal OKRs and track it, and they report it. They voluntarily report it, and some of them have been sharing the numbers periodically with the managers as well. So that can be optional, but it is a good practice to share it with the team and see if they want to take that.
Wonderful. And there's another question, and I can't help but ask this, and it's a great question to ask. So there's the question around speed dating, and the question is, would you clarify whether the speed dating during the speed dating round, does each department only share their OKRs with other departments, or whether they also ask for feedback from other departments on their own OKRs and adjust their OKRs based on that feedback?
Yeah, it's actually both ways. So we have in the speed dating, each team presents what they want to achieve and ask for feedback. And so if I imagine, say, there is platform team and sales team, so each team presents their OKRs, and they state where they need the support from the other team, and they ask for what support they can provide to help them achieve the goal, and we repeat that for the other team.
Yeah, I think one of the things I want to add is that that round also takes out a lot of redundant OKRs or duplicate OKRs between every team. So it cancels out a whole lot of the channel distortion that can happen. Because you're in a democratic process, you might lose out the strategy because every team wants to do probably their own thing. So the constant reminder of what that strategy is another thing that every team holds each other accountable for. So that's another great exercise that happens in this process.
Fantastic.
And I also wanted to add on one thing that I think Ganesh has not mentioned, and Ganesh, if you give me the liberty, I think Ganesh is also a is a person who used OKRs for his own benefit, for his own personal thing. Ganesh, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I set up my personal OKRs like inspired by this exercise, and in my personal OKRs, I have objectives, and I am a data-driven person. So that way, some people might raise their eyebrow, say, okay, do you quantify and track all of these? For instance, spending time with the kids and making sure I have the quality time on us every single day, or time I spend on yoga. So all of those activities, I've created a personal OKR list, and that actually has been it is in a good way to track it. I review it monthly and quarterly to see how I'm progressing at a personal level. So OKRs, by all means, can be a personal goal setting exercise as well.
Fantastic. And I think it's a great exercise. And this is where employees, organizations at their own personal level can set developmental goals, and these developmental goals can go beyond just job-related competencies, like in your case, Ganesh, trying to create a better standard of life for yourself. And thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate it. We do have a few more questions coming up, and this one I'd like to throw at Kenneth. The question being asked here is, since we said that OKR should not be linked to reward and incentives, the question asked over here was, what are we measuring if we're not linking it to performance? How will the task related to OKRs be driven eventually? So, Kenny, would love to hear.
Yeah, there are many ways to answer the question. I think the first thing to look at is, what are we measuring? We're measuring team success, First, you're measuring how those multiple team successes can contribute towards department or function or product success, and how can those different departments, products, or functions contribute towards the organization's success. So it's the tracking of those measures and the progress of those measures that enable that. So that's what we're measuring. The challenge with our performance management system, keep in mind, is that performance management system is about the individual. And it's more about how the individual performs and sees their performance changing over a period of time. And when we start looking at OKRs as the only method to manage performance, and I'm stressing on the word only method to managing performance, then that's when it fails. Organizations have successfully used OKRs as an input to performance management. So that has happened as well, and it's happening in many organizations, and probably that's a topic for another webinar. But yes, it has happened, and it happened really well. There are softwares that enable that to happen, but to get to that level, and since this topic is about getting OKRs right the first time, I would plead to all the leaders here, first year, or at least the first couple of quarters, tell your team members that we're not linking OKRs as yet to performance management. Just tell them. And then I would like you as leaders for the next couple of quarters to see what happens when you tell that to your teams. You'll be surprised on how people show up with innovations. You'll be surprised how people show up wanting to do and bring about that change in the business, contributing to the change in the business that Ganesh was talking about. You will start seeing that happen. And the moment, and we've also seen organizations who have directly, immediately linked OKRs to performance management. And what happens is then eventually you're not really changing the business, you're just running the business as it is. So when you're choosing OKRs, you got to go back to why are you doing OKRs? Is your OKRs to help you scale? Is your OKRs to create empowerment? Is your OKRs to build about agility and innovation? Is your OKRs to really help teams transform their way of working into more engaged, collaborative ways of working? If that's the reason, then don't link it to performance management as yet. But if you want to, then your only reason of doing OKRs would be almost like an old wine in a new bottle. You'll have an O, you'll have a bunch of KRs, and they'll be linked to performance management. That's the only thing that's going to change. None of the other superpowers that are promised through OKRs will happen if you immediately link it to performance management.
Thank you for that, Kenny. And we have one last question for you, Ganesh, before you sign out. And this is a question on how long before the start of the next quarter, how long before that next quarter should the OKRs be ready?
We start the exercise a month in advance, and at least 2 weeks before the quarter starts, we try and have this finalized and published on the tool.
Yes, and that's a great practice. Thank you for sharing that. I concur with Ganesh on this one. In fact, when we do OKRs, I think my experience has been that there's very little conversation about initiatives. So in the world of OKRs, there's objectives, there's key results, but there's also initiatives. And initiatives is where the execution comes alive, right? So when teams set OKRs and evangelize it and publish that within the organization, you need to give time for some speed dating to happen. After that, people need some time to go back and think through what initiatives am I going to work on that's going to start giving me results, which I will see through my KRs. So people need to get that thinking time on planning those projects, looking for resources, going back and saying, hey, you know what? Maybe this OKR does not make sense because I do not have this resource right now, which I thought I had. And my initiative was dependent on those resources. So giving that week or 2 weeks before the actual implementation is a great practice. Now, in the world of OKRs, this is not a rule, mind you guys. So it's not a rule that you have to start 1 month prior, or it's not a rule you have to start 15 days prior. See what works for you. You might be a small team and you might be able to garner and rake your OKRs within a week's time before you actually implement at the beginning of the quarter. So there are no rules with OKRs, there are only guidelines. I think the larger guideline here is give yourself enough time. You decide how much is that enough, so that people can think through their OKRs for the next quarter, so that people can think through their initiatives and make any adjustments whatsoever before the implementation begins. The converse of this, guys, is what we don't want to see ideally is 10 days or 15 days in the quarter has already passed and you're still planning your OKRs for that quarter. And that's something that we really don't want to see happen, because that's where you start losing the entire agile practice of being nimble-footed, making sure that there's a discipline and rigor of doing things around OKRs. So make sure that you don't plan OKRs within the quarter, but a little before. And with that, Ganesh, thank you so much for being here with us and sharing insights from your own experiences of implementing OKRs first time right with Gramener. And we wish you all the best. Thank you very much, Ganesh.
Thanks for having me, Nikhil. Yeah, great conversation. And good luck to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ganesh.
Thank you, Ganesh.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
All right. So that actually takes us to handing over to Senthil. And Senthil, handing over the remote control to you now. And Senthil is actually going to share with us a really interesting software-based case study with an organization called Deriv. And Senthil, ball's in your court now.
Sure. Thank you, Nikhil. So, folks, very excited to share the story of our customer Deriv. We have been working with them now for 3 quarters. And Deriv by itself is a 20-year-old company. And today they have a turnover of more than $1 billion. They are headquartered in Malaysia, but they have people from 57 different nationalities. And they have offices in places like UAE, Cyprus, and Belarus, and several other locations, Malta, South America, and so on and so forth. And today the platform is actually used by more than 2.5 million traders, and they have hundreds of millions of trades every month. And they are actually used by people, right, in all the 5 different continents. Although they are 20-year-old, they actually saw tremendous growth, during the COVID season. And whenever we start working with clients, we always ask them, right, what is your why of OKRs? Why do you want to implement OKRs? And what are the business challenges that you are planning to address with OKRs? So for Deriv, while they have been growing at a particular rate, for the past 19 years, but with COVID, they actually saw significant acceleration. And they had a whole list of challenges which they really wanted to, overcome, right? So first, from just trading derivatives and stock, they also started, developing platforms for trading crypto, right, cryptocurrencies. And as you know, these are brand new, technically very intensive, and you also, this is a business where customers have multiple choices, right? And as long as you deliver great usability and a great user experience, along with excellent performance, right, with very little lag time, right, customers would love to work with you. But at the same time, you also need to integrate your platform with multiple, financial tools, right, particularly for people who need to deposit and withdraw money, right? So it's a technically very intensive work, and I'm sure anybody in technology can relate to that. In addition to it, just before we started working with them, right, their cryptocurrency trading had actually taken off, and they started growing at 10% every month. They were hiring 10% new people every month, right? So there was a surging demand for their platform, and HR had to recruit people, right, at a dramatically altered pace. And obviously they had to manage all the new regulatory issues, as the crypto related regulations were coming up in different countries, and they had to really stay at least 2 steps ahead of such regulatory issues. And they had to get their customer support team, right, which they believe had a lot of room for improvement. They had to really train them and get them on board, right? As you have a surge of users, right? You want to make sure you retain those customers and keep them happy, right? And they had COVID, had definitely had a disruption, because people who were working in their office started working from home, right? And they were also recruiting people, as I said, in all sorts of places like South America and Belarus and Malta and Dubai and so on and so forth. So people were joining and they were working from home. So it's making them really attune to the culture of Deriv, right? And making them really tick to the ways of working of Deriv. That was a huge challenge. So when Deriv came to us, right, they had not decided on OKRs. They said that, we have tried multiple goal management and execution frameworks, and we are not sure, right, whether we should take Deriv. And the interesting thing is that we had, multiple such case studies even in APAC, right? So we were able to walk them through such experiences where we had taken a customer's business challenge, right? And through a combination of our very easy to use intuitive software as well as coaching support, we really helped them to, achieve all those business challenges. So we actually, Deriv got convinced that, OKRs is really the way to go, and they decided to adopt. Now they had a question. When they signed up with us, they were 500 people, right? And they were growing, as I said, 10% every month. They were adding 50 people at least every month. So they had a question, right? Should we actually start small, right? And then scale up, right? Have a pilot and then scale up. But then that would really defeat the whole purpose of managing growth, right? Which was actually moving very rapidly. So what we did was we actually said that, let us, work with you and draw out a program, right? Where we can actually bring in the entire set of 500 folks on board immediately, right? So we did this through, giving them, product training, giving them OKR basics, foundation training. We identified the department leaders, did one-on-one coaching with them. And, when you define OKRs, what you can do is you can have the company level OKRs, you can have department level OKRs, and you can have even sub-department level OKRs. You can do all of those. And if you do those, then you can make sure that pretty much everyone contributes to either one key result or one sub-key result, right? So you can actually define it in such a way. And that would really help them to manage the entire organization through a set of outcomes, right? So that's what we did. And we took them through a program called the Learning Quarter and Excellence Quarter engagement. We call it as a Learning Quarter because, as you would have heard from Ganesh, Kenneth, and Nikhil, right? There's a lot to learn when you talk about OKRs. People need to learn how to stretch, how to set up stretch goals, how to execute your OKRs, what sort of check-in frequency you need to have, right? How to conduct meetings, right? And review meetings with OKRs. So there's a lot to learn. So we call the first quarter or sometimes even the first couple of quarters as a learning quarters. And then the next couple of quarters as an excellence quarter where the team can set up internally an OKR center of excellence. So Profit.co will help you to set up both with the product as well as with the methodology, right? And what we did was we also helped them, right, with employee engagement and change management initiatives. And Profit.co has a great task management tool. So, they started using that as well. And as Ganesh and Kenneth said, we absolutely recommend people to have, not to link performance with OKRs, right? That was our advice and that they absolutely implemented. But at the same time, they also wanted to make use of Profit.co's performance management tool. So we actually helped them with the replacement as well. So as we started rolling out, we started getting some early feedback, right? And, earlier, some of our panelists talked about the dependencies, which departments can have, right? So for example, we always advise customers to identify who are your external customers and who are your internal customers, right? So a function like HR is actually servicing every other function as an internal customer for HR, right? So for sales, right? Sales is an internal customer for marketing. So once you have this clarity, right? Who are your external customers? Who are your internal customers? Are your OKRs going to make an impact, right? For either of them? Once you do it, right? And once you define the OKRs at every level, do the alignment and actually get them onto the tool, right? They started getting early feedback on the dependencies and on the problems, right? So we actually, in fact, walk them through this execution methodology. This is how Profit.co advises our customers to execute a particular quarter, right? We call this as the PEAL cycle: plan, execute, engage, and learn, right? By the first week, right? You start before the end of the quarter, like what Ganesh said, at least a few weeks, 2 weeks before the end of the quarter, but you complete the entire planning exercise, which means company level OKR, department level OKR, sub-departments, alignment, all of those in the first week. But then the most important aspect of OKR execution is really the grind of weekly check-ins, right? Week after week, people checking in on time and having review meetings based on those. And this is another area where, when you are implementing for 800 people, right, the OKR champions need to know, right, who are the people who are checking on time, right? Are people having difficulties? Who are the people who have logged into the tool on time, right? So who are the people who are engaging more, right, in the process? So all of those, the OKR champions get, right, the dashboards, and employee engagement starts happening. We also define the weekly team meetings as well as one-on-one feedback. And we strongly encourage some positive reinforcements, right? You give awards for people in each phase, right? For example, people who are ready to take stretch goals, right? In the next phase, people who are very meticulous with check-ins, and people who are most engaging and collaborative with people, or even in the learning cycle. Learning in this methodology, as you can see, happens throughout the quarter, right? Even while planning for the first time, everybody gets a 360-degree view of, the OKRs of the company, the OKRs of various other departments. So for people who are actually existing in silos, now you are actually going and working with all the other departments, right, very, very closely. So once you do this, you get to the end of the quarter, right, where you do end of the quarter reflections, which is a very, very important exercise. And that really helps people to, reflect, right, on what exactly worked well, right, throughout the quarter, right, and how should they plan for the next quarter. So we actually work with them through this entire quarter. We call this as the learning quarter. They make use of the product, they made use of the product very well. And this management is an amazing management, right? So even if you today go and see the number of job openings, right, in Deriv, you would see hundreds of openings in multiple geographies. It's a very diverse, amazing company. So they went through this exercise very successfully. And what were, this was the value stream, for example, which we identified, right? So we identified the sub-departments within the company, right? And we really helped them identify the end internal customers and decided the OKRs for the entire company. So the cultural climate was very good, right? It is, for OKRs, definitely culture plays a very, very important role. And we absolutely help them to, work on that using employee engagement techniques. And they had defined the OKRs for each of the sub-departments, very, very well. Right? So now, what were the results? So now, here they are in the third quarter of OKR implementation with Profit.co. And they are, super happy and super proud with the results, right, which they have achieved. They believe, right, this was one of the toughest business environment for anybody, right? They had to manage the growth, and they had to make sure that the platform, right, actually stood the test of hyper growth. And they believe they have sailed through this challenging business scenario. And the metrics and dashboards which we provided gave them a lot of insights, right? So they are having 95% OKR adoption, with 86% of the people doing on-time check-in. And they believe OKRs have actually provided them fantastic agility, business agility, to respond very rapidly, right? So we always recommend that you don't change, right, a whole bunch of OKRs in the middle of the quarter, right? You can change maybe 10 to 15%, but with a tool and with the visibility, people are able to see, right, how other teams are performing, right? So they get motivated by great performance. And if somebody is not performing well and somebody needs some help, that is visible as well, and people can collaborate and share their resources as they may need, or management can make a call, right, saying that, okay, we will start, allocating resources somewhere else. So this whole idea of, execution with OKRs really helped them to bring in the business agility, right? And in terms of the outcomes that they actually got, one, they have been able to manage their growth pretty well. And in several surveys, right? For example, their Dubai office in LinkedIn, I saw that their Dubai operations, UAE operations, won the Best Employer Award, right, in several prestigious, magazines actually. So managing the growth, managing the new employees was a very important outcome for them. Managing hyper growth was important. Executing the technology projects, right, which they were actually doing was very, very important. And they could actually achieve all of these outcomes. But there was one additional outcome, right, which they are not actually spelled out, right, but which they actually received, a benefit, an additional benefit they received, right? What was it? As they started seeing weekly check-ins and people writing their weekly reviews of their performance, right, the management team got a very good insight, right, into continuous performance, right? So how the various departments were executing. So they got a great view into how the various folks were executing. And there was a record, week after week, there's a record of check-ins, reviews, that is there. And when the time came for them to set up an internal OKR center of excellence, right? So they could just go back and look at, the people who have really enthusiastically participated, right, in this whole exercise. And a high performance team has actually emerged, right, from this whole exercise. So building a high performance team was a key additional benefit which they received, right, in addition to balancing their growth and managing their growth and ensuring OKR adoption, right? So they are super happy. And in fact, they are actually publicly allowed us to share this. In addition to it, if you recollect, I had mentioned that they wanted to manage the customer support better, right? So they have a 20-year-old history, and a lot of their customers make their decision based on other customer reviews. They look at platforms like Trustpilot to see how many reviews they have got, right? So they wanted to improve the level of customer support. So they actually, the customer support team and customer success team, they got a lot of importance in the whole OKR program. And they set up some ambitious goals in terms of how many positive reviews we would get, right? We would improve the positive reviews in Trustpilot from 1,000 to 5,000. We will improve our Trustpilot rating from 4.2 to 4.6. And look at the actual results that they have derived, right? So they have now, within 2 quarters, they have moved from 1,050 customer reviews to 7,835 reviews, while improving their positive rating from 4.2 to 4.4. Right? So the whole customer success team, they actually were very proud. Everybody had a very healthy internal competition across the teams to show off their success. Right? So the customer success team really absolutely came out on tops. They absolutely beat all the targets, and they were able to get so much of reviews, which means the job of marketing is going to be much easier. There's a great improvement in branding, right, and visibility, both branding towards your customers as well as branding towards your employees. They're very, very serious about employee branding. And here is a quote from their CTO. So Anthony, in fact, one of the important things is that whenever you implement OKRs, you really need executive commitment. And with Daryl, it's a very smart and a very determined management team. And Anthony, and as well as the COO, right, Rakshit, he's from Delhi actually. So both of them really, absolutely had an amazing, type of, pedal, they had actually pushed the accelerator, right at the right pace to make sure adoption happens. And, as I said, they were not very sure initially whether they should go with OKRs, and they were super happy with the way OKRs actually worked for them. And of course, Profit.co played a role in really working with them to achieve these results. So this is a great quote from him. Now, just to conclude this, what is the OKR value realization that you can expect, and what companies like Deriv are actually deriving, right, when they go through the OKR journey? And this is something which we are actually seeing in our customers as they go through OKRs in multiple quarters. So while everybody wants to achieve their strategic goals in the first quarter, we see that almost immediately, right? As soon as you do your OKRs, you have done the alignment, you've done the planning, you've got them onto a tool like Profit.co, you're going to see increased visibility. This increased visibility is the first and lowest hanging fruit, which everybody will get. And you are also going to see, even in the first quarter, an improved alignment, right? Everybody knows how their goal is actually contributing to the company's goals, and how they have horizontal alignment and dependencies on each other, right? And as you keep doing check-ins, as you have done collaborative planning, as you are doing engagement, as you are doing your first reflect, the foundation for organizational learning, right, has been set. So we feel that organizational learning is a very, very important benefit that comes from OKRs, and the first quarter actually lays the foundation of that, right? And also, as you keep moving, right, we encourage including celebrations, right, to improve employee engagement. And obviously, as you do weekly reviews with OKRs, you're going to get an early identification of problems, right? So that's going to be a huge benefit. And also, as you keep moving on to, the third quarter, you see that, people have actually seen two cycles where people have taken stretch goals. Some have succeeded and some have not. And stretch goals have become a way of life, right? So people are absolutely happy with them, comfortable with the idea of doing stretch goals. Execution has started improving. And of course, that executives are absolutely, they would like to have better accountability and transparency. And you see that, that is really getting achieved, right? Accountability and transparency gets achieved. Now, as people go to the fourth quarter, and some people even achieve this in the third quarter, right? They see that the achievement of the OKRs start hitting 0.7 to 1.2. Right? So 0.7 is when you actually have stretch goals, 1.0 when you have committed goals. This is how Google actually measures. And this is what we also recommend our customers to do. And we see that employee engagement goes up one notch higher, right? It keeps improving. And we see as the OKR Center of Excellence gets set up, a high-performance team started emerging. This is with exactly like what happened with Derek. We have multiple case studies like this in tech companies as well as non-tech companies, and we have seen this cycle happening. As long as you have great executive commitment, you have employee engagement, you follow the methodologies, what we propose, and you use a tool and you absolutely implement, you do that, this value realization journey can happen. And it has happened, we have for our customers in multiple geographies, right? Whether it is in APAC, India, Europe, Middle East, Americas, doesn't matter, right? This will absolutely work in terms of value realization, right? So with that, let me actually conclude this very exciting story. And there are just 3 quarters in this. They have a long way to go. They are quite excited. We are excited. The journey continues. Okay, thanks.
Great. Thank you, Senthil. This was fabulous sharing the journey. Thank you for giving us so much information. Hopefully, this has been of great use for the audience as well. I'm going to invite Kenny. Kenny, we have a tall task of wrapping this particular piece in the next 5 minutes, no more. And my request to you is going to be, in the next 5 minutes, what are some summary messages that we would like to give people before we leave the room open for any Q&A? What are some do's and don'ts that we would like to share with our audience on how to get OKR implementation right? So over to you. We have 5 minutes to go, Kenny.
All right. So we've already spoken about a whole lot of things. We've spoken about the need for executive sponsorship. We've spoken about strategy first. We've spoken about less is more. We've spoken about the three ways in which to do OKR. So top down, bottom up, and cross. So we've spoken about that. We like PODI. So PODI stands for passionate about objectives, but dispassionate about initiatives. So this is where agility comes in. When you're clear about the goal, but you're okay to change the way to meet the goal all the time. So that's what that's one of the do's. Encourage people to be innovative, encourage people to be agile and thinking on their feet when they're hitting a roadblock. It's not about changing the objective, but changing the way in order to reach the objectives and key results. I think this is important, building psychological safety. In order for you to create, especially the setting and the tracking, that's where psychological safety is so important. The setting, you want people to tell you what they think is important. You want people to contribute towards the strategic and tactical goals, whether they are sitting in a team setting for OKRs or they're sitting as participants in the organizational setting of OKRs. I remember this amazing moment that Nikhil and I faced when we were doing OKRs for a top FMCG company, where one of the individuals, after the organization OKR was set and some department OKRs was set, there was one individual who stood up and said, "Hey guys, I thought that we had sustainability as part of our strategy. Why isn't sustainability around OKRs?" And the leaders, you should have seen their faces, they were white at that moment because they suddenly realized that they missed a very important objective and key result on sustainability. And that's that. And but the display of the leaders was more welcoming, saying that don't tell us what we have to do, but it was more welcoming. And that's an example of psychological safety, your welcoming of ideas. And especially during the tracking, it's even more important because you want people to come in and say, hey, we tried something and it failed, or it's failing and we need support, we need help. The tracking is less about numbers in a system as much as it's about the learning that goes behind what's working and not working. So that qualitative reviews that Senthil was talking about is such an important part of the OKR journey, where people come in and share that. So make sure you have the right systems, methodologies, and especially that psychologically safe culture for that to happen. Now, clear don'ts. I'm sure your eyes are just popping up on the first one out there. Don't delegate OKRs to human resources. I'll tell you why not to do that. Because when we have seen that happening, the first thing that happens is HR then becomes the glorified coordinator. Okay, HR becomes the team that goes ahead and sends updates to people and does scheduling, which it shouldn't be doing. HR's job is to build psychological safety. HR's job is to guide people through the process. The job of OKRs needs to be with the C level, the CEO, the CTO, the COO, the sales head. They are the kind of people who need to be owning up to OKRs as the process, not HR. HR should be the guide of the cultural change that happens with the OKR process. Moreover, there's also another temptation that the moment you tell HR to do it, then the first thing that can happen is OKRs becomes performance management, which is something you want to avoid as well. Don't copy paste from other companies. If Google has done it this way, or if you see Derive has done it this way, many other companies have done OKRs. Don't just say, oh, let's do it the way, we have done it. And that causes a whole lot of heartburn as well, because contextually, your company is different. Your firm is different. The way you are in your growth journey is different. Your culture is different. Your leaders are different. The kind of people that you hire is different. And there'll be a lot of dynamics that makes your company different as well. So make sure that you, as Senthil pointed out, in that learning journey, you're not only learning the process, but you're iterating and pivoting to a process that works for you. That's an important piece in that. The other piece, do not cancel your OKR check-ins and cadence meetings. They are the holy grail of your OKR methodology. Okay, that's what keeps things going all the time. So that is as important as even setting your OKRs. So that means your OKR check-ins, people need to show up. If they're not showing up, then you got to make sure that if a person is supposed to present something in that check-in or that cadence review, and they're not there, you create mechanisms where other people can present on that person's behalf. But the process does not stop for any reason, because remember, this is about the top priority goals. OKRs are about top priority. So if you say we're going to cancel out a top priority for something else, the question is, why isn't that something else a top priority? So consider that. So that means you've got to keep your OKR check-ins and cadence reviews alive all the time. Don't just cascade OKRs. We've spoken about it. Make sure it's a three-way process. Don't be selectively transparent. Now, what do we mean by this? We have seen organizations who say we're doing OKRs, but the only people who see the OKRs are the leaders, or some sections of the business. When you're deciding to do OKRs, make sure that it's as transparent as possible. We do understand that there are certain things in the organization, like mergers and acquisitions, or certain financial things you may not want to be transparent about, especially if you're a public company. We understand that. But as much as you can, let everybody from the intern to the senior leader should know what's happening. They should have access to that system, which tells them what's happening. Because like Ganesh said, you never know. There might be a person who wants to write an OKR and work on an OKR that contributes somewhere. We have amazing stories of heroes and have emerged in teams where they've seen an OKR in another department and they say, hey, you know what? I can help them. And the team has not even asked for the help. And we have so many stories like that has happened because of transparency. And don't bring in an old wine in a new bottle. If you're thinking that OKRs is going to be just another thing for you to do and give it a fancy thing that you're doing OKRs, then don't do it because somebody else is doing it. Do it because you clearly see a benefit out of it, and do it in a way that helps you solve those issues and grab onto the opportunities that you see as a business. That's it.
All right. So thank you for that summary, Kenneth. And that's pretty much all that we have to offer in this webinar. But we do want to make some announcements for the benefit of people here. A little about what we do as Okr International has to do with the kind of education we're trying to evangelize, which is one of our own OKRs, by the way. So do look up our websites on OKR accreditation, our OKR foundation course, and these are all very, very useful programs to be a part of. Of course, we also have services around offering remedial courses for organizations that want to get their OKRs right, having tried it the first time round. Of course, we also do stuff around helping organizations implement OKRs, providing advisory services, and working with venture funds. So that's who we are. We're driven to help organizations become more agile, more collaborative, and more successful. I'm going to ask Senthil to talk a little about profit as we open the forum for a few more questions and answers. We do have another 5 to 7 minutes to do that. So Senthil, over to you quickly. Thank you very much.
Sure. So folks, as we said before, we are a Silicon Valley-based SaaS company. We do work with leading enterprises across the globe, as well as very innovative startups. While our foundation is a great OKR management software, which is very intuitive and easy to use, but we do have solutions in adjacent areas like task management, and employee engagement, of course, is quite part of the whole OKR execution cycle. And for people who would like to bring in performance management after a couple of quarters, or if they would like to do performance management independently, we have a very strong performance management module as well, right? And we do publish a lot of content, so please do check out our website. We have, of course, published a series of books on OKRs we're going to be sharing with all the people who are attending the session today. Right? Thanks, Kenneth.
Thank you so much, Senthil. And we're going to leave the room open for any Q&A. And I do see there are some questions here. So I'm going to shoot some questions out with the limited time that we have. So let's go for it, shall we? I think one of the big questions that was asked earlier on, do we have any framework to check OKR maturity? So I'm going to leave the forum open. Kenneth or Senthil, any one of you can talk about it. Do we have a framework to check OKR maturity?
Yeah, so this is something that we do for organizations as part of a consulting practice. We get into the organization and we have a set of Q&A that we ask. This is largely to check, one, what is the leadership buy-in? The second, what is the readiness for change? The third is the context that the organization is in terms of its growth cycle. And the fourth is, of course, its people and its people capability. We look at these factors. Of course, we look at other things like its product, its service, and its all of those things. We look at all these factors, and we then look at and tell the company, are you guys ready for OKRs or not? Eventually, guys, it boils down to this. Wherever you are in that scale, you can do OKRs. That's where it is. I haven't found a single type of organization, whatever its kind of frame, that cannot do OKRs. Yeah. It all boils down to the leaders. It boils down eventually to them also as well. What's the reason they want to do OKRs? And if we can coach them in the right direction, and that's what Nikhil and I do a lot of, that's what we do in our training programs. If we can coach them in the right directions, there's not a single organization that cannot be made ready to do OKRs.
Fabulous. Thank you for that, Kenny. Senthil, I'm going to hit this one for you. The question being, can you give us an example or step on how to build sustainability with OKRs? Because in my company, in Q3, our team saw a decrease in the spirit to implement and fill OKRs. So any thoughts or any suggestions there on how to make sure we are sustaining the entire momentum on OKRs after a few quarters?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. What we recommend is the OKR group of OKR champions need to build in employee engagement as part of the methodology, right? So as we said, we have seen people actually giving out awards right throughout the quarter, right? So and awards, it can be lunches, right? It can be pat on the back. It is, you can do multiple things for achievements and work throughout the quarter, right? From the planning, right, where people have done stretch goals, or during execution, if people are trying innovative new experiments, right? So again, you encourage them, right? So we say that as part of the methodology, at least once in a month, you have one celebration session and you have one learning session. And if you do that, if people see that they are getting value out of the program, they are getting recognized for their efforts, right? Results may or may not come initially, right? But if they see that that is really happening, then you would see that engagement, you would see that, this is not another checkbox to be ticked off, this is not another chore, but people eagerly look forward to make an impact, right, in their organization. And we have seen companies who have sustained for multiple quarters, right? I mean, we have been working with people who are now in their 12th quarter, 13th quarter, and it is just growing, right? So it can be done if you build in employee engagement right into the program, actually.
Absolutely. And celebrating and acknowledging whatever's working is an integral part of the culture that's needed for OKRs to not just survive, but also thrive. So thanks for that answer, Senthil. And Kenneth, we have 1 minute to take one last question, and that's where we're going to wrap up. And the question is, at the end of a quarter, when reporting OKRs, we do not want to present a cross-departmental report by stating that this department has X% success while that department has a Y% success. Can you suggest another way to group OKRs other than by departments?
Yeah, I think, this is where I will question the question itself, because I will go down and deep and understand what are the reasons why you do not want to present that kind of report. And I think the answers could be around that. It might be around that it causes competitiveness, it causes insecurities. Maybe it's not apples to apples. It could be a lot of reasons I can imagine as the reason why you are talking about this. But then hence to answer your question, is there another way to do this? Yeah, one of the other ways that we see is that organizations have three types of structures actually. One is your organogram, which is your departments and the functions, and how they're divided, which is based on the hiring methodology. And most OKRs, they take the shape of that organogram. The second structure is your product and services structure, where you have different products and services, and then you have people who work for the product and services. So you might have a sales team, but within the sales team, you have specialists who work on product A, product B. So then you have this product and services structure. So you might want to think about as an alternative, if you don't want to use a department structure, to use a product and services structure. The third methodology, which I find is even more dynamic, is an organizational fractal structure. Now, an organizational fractal structure is doing OKRs where the work matters. Now, this is where you break organizational hierarchy and you do OKRs in the form of, you have organizational OKRs, but then everybody then come together as common interest groups. That this is if your organization can permit something like this, where you can have common interest groups or autonomous groups that come together and say, hey, you know what, we want to work on this particular OKR. And they say, our job is as a cross-functional team, we're coming together and doing it. We're seeing a lot of this happening in there's a kind of organization that's emerging today. It's called DAOs, which is decentralized autonomous organizations, the big part of the crypto world that's happening. We see even some other organizations. I don't know how many of you heard of companies like Morningstar and Zappos. These are the companies who start setting up OKRs in a very holocratic way. So that means there's no hierarchy, there's no manager in the team. So when something like that happens, people come to where work happens.
It's almost like a network organization,
yes.
and that's where you start reviewing OKRs based on OKRs rather than based on functions. So great, thank you very much, everybody. Ganesh is not here, but it was wonderful having him here. Senthil, Kenneth, you guys have been wonderful. We would also like to thank two more people, Sneha from Okr International and Sasi from Profit.co. They have been working relentlessly in the background to make this happen. So Thank you both, and also to our wonderful participants who've been around till the nth hour. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully this has been useful for you in one way or the other. Wish you guys all the best. Signing off. Take care.